Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining tonight's show. Tonight's guest is one of extreme importance if you care about things like free speech and the right to express unpopular ideas. And if you believe the government shouldn't infringe in any way on those rights. Chairman of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru Movement, Omali Yeshitela, joins us. Now, Omali has spent his entire life working to liberate Black people in the US and around the globe, and his focus is often on economic freedom, self-determination, and reparations. He's undoubtedly a Black activist and a socialist, which makes him unpopular. Democrats don't like him because he certainly doesn't like them. And Republicans don't like him because he's, well, a socialist. And that's probably the point. The government has a tendency to go after unpopular figures knowing you won't care, or maybe you'll even champion it if you don't like the person enough. They can then make laws and set precedents using the unpopular person when you're not caring, and then eventually they use those very same laws on you. Now, right now in this country, we are experiencing a crackdown on free speech and ideas. We've seen an increase in the rhetoric of labeling people terrorists. They've even begun laying the groundwork of creating laws and departments inside of the government to crack down on dissent. Most of the pushback at this point has come from conservatives. It's been disproportionately liberals who've been cracking down on conservatives, and it's been disproportionately conservatives battling for free speech and the exchange of ideas. So this is why Chairman Omali Yeshitela is an important case that we can't ignore. Being a Black activist and socialist certainly doesn't make him any darling of the right. And I suggest liberals know this. And because they know he's not someone conservative free speech torchbearers are paying any attention to, they can use him to make consequential laws and set precedents that can then be used against us all, but more importantly, against political opponents. Now, what am I talking about? Well, right now, the US government is accusing Omali of being a Russian asset. They're accusing him of being funded, directed, and acting as Omali Yeshitela. It will be a loss for us all. This is why tonight's conversation is so important, and I hope you stick around. Now, before we get to our guest, I do want to tell you about Field of Greens. Field of Greens is a wonderful product that I've been using to help get my daily fruits and vegetables into my diet. It's a simple powder that you mix into ice water or iced tea. My favorite flavor is lemon lime, which ends up making the drink taste like iced green tea with lemon. But there's also a new product called Lean, which is an excellent way to rev up your metabolism and burn fat. I think I have it right. Yeah, I do. Here it is. This is Lean. Lean also helps curb your appetite so you don't end up eating a bunch of junk, which many of us are guilty of. All you got to do is head to fieldofgreens.com and use the promo code KIM to get 15% off your first order. Chairman Omali Yeshitela, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to your base. I'm glad that you've given us an opportunity to access this platform. So thank
Oh,
you.
of course. Well, thank you for being here. I'm very fascinated and interested in your history and the work you've done over the decades. And a lot of you've had a lot of successes. You've had some setbacks. We may not agree on certain things. There might be things we do agree on, but I find your entire history so fascinating. So tell us, first of all, how long have you been at you founded the Uhuru? I'm making sure I'm trying to pronounce this correctly. Uhuru this
Right,
is how we say it, the Uhuru
right, right.
movement. How long have you been at this movement?
Uh, Going on 60 years now, I've been here.
60.
Yeah, and that's as active organized force. But uh,
You
the
don't look
truth is,
old
I was,
enough to have done something for 60 years.
well, that's an extraordinary compliment. But yeah, it's been at least 60 years. And I'm very fortunate to have been born at an incredibly momentous time in the world and in this country. I was born in 1941. And it was at a time when the struggles were very sharp in places like India and China, who were living under colonial domination themselves, and that Black people in this country and other places in the world were seeking answers and seeking freedom as well. And So this moment in history that fractured the assumption that the colonial white power could not be moved, that people could not find freedom. And so India and then China, in particular, 47 and 49, were really important examples. And then, of course, the people of Korea were struggling during part of that time, and especially, as you know, the Korean War, as it's characterized, was just popping. So people may not have been conscious so much of taking sides as it related to China or India. That is, say, although many were. Uh, and in fact, interestingly, some African groups actually supported Japan in the Second Imperialist World War. The whole notion of fracturing this solid, hegemonic, very oppressive colonial force that we had to deal with all around the world. And so it was impressive and important to have these examples of peoples who were not white, who were fighting against colonialism and having some modicum of success. So I was born during that period. And
So,
go ahead,
well, tell
please.
us about the movement itself. So did you create the movement, the Uhuru Movement?
I did. And I created the movement in the wake of horrendous assassinations and mass jailings of Black people in this country and various other places around the world. This organization, as you mentioned, the African People's Socialist Party ourselves, it was created in 1972. But before that, I was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. And I was first imprisoned as leader of the SNCC organization. I organized the SNCC in the state of Florida, and organized, in fact, the first membership-based SNCC organization in this country. And so SNCC was a very bold and courageous organization, primarily of young people, though the wonderful Ella Baker played a major role in influencing how we would move and things that we had to do. But it was an organization, and it believed in direct action. It was a departure from much of what had dominated the movement through the civil rights issue, the passivity of the NAACP as it was perceived, and certain other kinds of organizations. So SNCC was very bold and believed very strongly in direct action, taking action. And so it was as a member of SNCC that I was arrested in 1966, December 1966, after having talked to the mayor in the city of St. Petersburg seriously, having written letters and what have you, protesting the fact that they had an 8 by 10-foot mural that was displayed on the wall of City Hall that caricatured African people in obscenely what people would characterize as racist terms. And so I, along with 5 other people, I tore the mural down from the wall and was sentenced ultimately to 5 years in prison for that. And
Wow.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was in and out of prison on that charge, but the struggle was still very, very hot. People were being arrested, people were being assassinated. That was 1966 when I tore the mural down, but Malcolm X had been assassinated in 1965. Dr. Martin Luther King would be assassinated in 1968. Fred Hampton would be assassinated in 1969. So there was this war that was being made against African people. People were being arrested. You had the murder of Fred Hampton by the FBI. And then a week after that attack in Chicago, 1969, the Black Panther organization was attacked in Los Angeles. This is where you see the emergence of the SWAT teams and things like that to contain the struggle of African people. So what became clear that we had to go beyond simply protesting. And so I built an organization called the Hunter Militant Organization. I conceived this while I was in prison. And this organization bore a real comparison to what was the Black Panther Party. Both of us, by the way, the Black Panther Party and the organization I was found had a historical connection to SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. It was SNCC that built in Lowndes County, Alabama, what has come to be known as the Black Panther Party. It was Lowndes County, Alabama, the emergence of an organization, Lowndes County Freedom Organization, that we saw a movement by Black people in this country away from dependence on the Democratic Party and moved in Lowndes County, Alabama. We were double crossed by the Democratic Party at the 1964 Democratic National Convention that happened in New Jersey. And so we went into SNCC, went into Lowndes County, Alabama, to build a Black political party and to run its own candidates. And the symbol of the Black political party was the Panther. That's where you see the emergence of the iconic Black Panther that people saw. And the media began to refer to it as the Black Panther Party, even though it was called the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. And so in 1966, when this happened, and we saw members of SNCC begin to utilize the Panther symbol everywhere. 1966, in St. Petersburg, Florida, our office was a SNCC office, but we had the big panther on the wall there. It was the Black Panther. So SNCC had captured the imagination of people everywhere, and the panther became iconic with the struggle of Black people, continues to be even to this day. So that's when we had that march to the City Hall on December 29th. That's when I was arrested for tearing the mural down. That's when I was given 11 different charges for that act that resulted in, among other things, the 5-year prison for grand larceny for having taken the mural down. And a clear utilization again of the state of a criminal law to deal with political protests. That was a glaring example. So while in prison, I created JOMO, and then even JOMO, as I mentioned, similar to the Black Panther Party, we were a really dynamic and powerful presence. I was released from prison on appeal bond 4 days before the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. I was on a bus going to Gainesville, Florida from St. Petersburg, Florida. And when I got, because they wanted me to come there, because I sort of built the Black Power movement in the state of Florida. So I was asked to come to Gainesville, Florida, and to participate in protests demanding the release of some young Africans who believed in Black Power and had been jailed in Alachua County, Gainesville, Florida. So I went there to participate in this 4 days after having been released on bond from prison on the mural charge. And when I got off the bus, then I learned that King had been assassinated. This is when I first learned it, when I got off the bus. And then clearly the demonstration changed from what it was intended to be initially. And so the demonstration revolved a lot of it around what happened to King. In fact, I was one of the first 2 persons ever to be arrested in the state of Florida under a new law inciting to riot that didn't require a riot. I just had to want a riot to happen. It was a thought crime. So I was jailed for that and stuck in the county jail. While I'm in jail, and they held me there for something like a month. And so I finally got bond to get out of jail here. And upon leaving the jail, I was out for something like 6 hours. And then the African sanitation workers in St. Petersburg, Florida, went on strike. When they went on strike, the Attorney General of the state of Florida got with my bondsman, and they came off my bond for the mural charge, which meant that I was rearrested. I'm now there for that. So I stayed in jail for another half month or so before finally being able to bond out on all of those charges. And then I had to I had to really find a way to get out of Gainesville, Florida, without being in prison again. So, we did stuff with different cars and going through the universities and running through the mazes and coming out. And so where I escaped literally from Gainesville, Florida, and got back into St. Petersburg, Florida, but this massive this sanitation work strike was on the verge of emerging in a very serious way, and we played a major role in that sanitation work as Jomo in that struggle. Built a
And what is
massive
that? What does that stand for again?
the hunter of
The
militant
Joe,
organizations.
the
Jomo,
you're saying, yeah, what does that stand?
hunter of militant organizations. The hunter,
Hunter
that's
of
a
okay.
Spanish name. Hunter is Spanish, but Jomo takes its origin from the struggle of African people in Kenya against the British. And anyway, uh, we had a massive organization of young people. I mean, massive. There was no place that we were not, and we played a major role in defining what that sanitation workers struggle would look like. So I was in and out of prison during this time, being locked up. They arrested me for verbal abuse of the police. Almost everything they've ever arrested me for had to do with speech, with something I said that they did not like, things that I believed in they did not like. I was regularly being visited by the FBI. And they were assuming I was getting money from what they call Red China or something to that effect, but there was an ongoing presence. I mean, they would go to my mother's home and my little nephews who lived there. I mean, who were 5, 6 years old. They would interrogate the children to find out what I was up to and where I was located, that kind of thing. So anyway, it became clear after a period of time that it was not enough just to be protesting, that we had to look at the issue of capturing and wielding political power. And so with the declaration that we would complete that revolution of the 1960s that had been militarily defeated with the murders of King, Malcolm X, and all the other sorts that was happening, Fred Hampton, et cetera, and we built the African People's Socialist Party as an anti-colonial movement that was consistent with the struggle of colonized people all around the world. So we moved away from this simplistic concept of fighting against the ideas in people's head like racism, whether white people liked us or not, and recognize, as most of the world did at that time, the fundamental question that we had to deal with colonialism. That's a political construct. And so you can't make white people not white. You can't. There were people getting rich on white people being able to so-called unlearn their racism, et cetera. And it places this white people in this very subjective place, and it puts Africans in this subjective place. And we want to move beyond that and raise this critical question of colonialism that most of the world was engaged in trying to escape from, to change their relationship to. And that's what the African People's Socialist Party did, that we had to complete this movement, complete this struggle that had been crushed with the assassination, with the massive arrests that were happening to us around the United States, et cetera. And so that's what informed the development. We combined with two other organizations in the state of Florida initially to build the African People's Socialist Party, and that happened in May of 1972.
So this is so fascinating. So you're saying that in the 60s, when there was obviously a concerted effort to try to squash any sort of movement for the liberation of Black people in America, that they at the time were investigating you for being somehow aligned with Red China. That's what they were
Yeah,
sort of making these accusations, saying China must be behind
yeah,
this movement of some kind. Oh, that's interesting. What's also interesting about what you just said is that so you allude to sort of critical race theory, which we're becoming more aware of. I don't even really know what that means, but it's a big hot topic today in 2020 2023, right, this decade. But you're kind of mentioning this as having been a thing in the 60s and 70s where people, the idea of we've got to combat race, you're saying you wanted to go beyond that conversation of people being just racist or having these ideas. Can you explain that? I mean, was critical race theory essentially happening in the 60s and 70s like it is today?
No, not like it is today. And we were not adherents to what of what you might call critical racist theory. The objective was not simply to explain things and the bad things that white people may have done or something to that effect, but it was recognition that none of it meant any difference if we didn't have power over our own lives. Like the ideas in the heads of white people, what happens to us as a people, not only in this country but globally. The only real way that can be countered is through the capture of political power in our own hands. We had to be a self-governing people. We had to achieve, that's the only way that we can achieve respect. We had to move away from welfare slavery that had been imposed on us and become self-reliant ourselves. We began to build things like economic development projects, so that we could begin the process of feeding, clothing, and housing ourselves. Malcolm X was a powerful influence, and so was the original Nation of Islam that Malcolm X was once associated. So the people wanted power, and we saw examples of that happening all around the world, in Vietnam, in Cuba, and various other places. People wanted power. And we never saw a single instance where the Vietnamese people were struggling to make white people like them. They wanted to have power, wanted to be able to say that I know my child is going to have a good life, not because somebody is pleased with me or I do enough to win favor by the colonizer, but because we have control of the capacity to feed, clothe, and house ourselves. And this was a distinguishing thing. So in we saw the development from the FBI in this instance. A guy named William Sullivan was the author from the FBI of what was called a counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, it came to be known as. And it targeted African people that it characterized as black nationalist hate groups. And that would have included me, but it ultimately included Martin Luther King and everybody who was African who was trying to make something happen for black people. And it was in the wake of this, again, that we saw things like the Panther 21, 1969, the U.S. government, the city of New York, working with the FBI, arrested 21 members of the Black Panther Party for conspiracy and put them on trial. The idea that they were going to blow up the flowers in the botanical garden or something to that effect. They tied them down for more than 2 years. They actually won the case eventually because the jury was contemptuous of the fact that they had used snitches and provocateurs, infiltrators into the Black Panther Party, and also because it was a time in history that I think close to where we are today in so many ways, where people were extraordinarily distrustful of how the government was acting and treating people. You remember that it was not too much long after this that we saw, things like the church committee hearings where the exposés was made on what the FBI, CIA, and all these other organizations were doing in the name of the American people in this country. So people were suspicious, contemptuous. They were contemptuous of this bloody war that was this vicious war against the heroic Vietnamese people who just wanted to be free and have control of their own resources. So there was this kind of situation that says I believe bears a lot of similarity to where we are now in terms of the social, the fracturing of the social fabric of this country, because people were losing belief in these systems, and like now, where this whole idea of the right to privacy. There are spies everywhere. There are cameras everywhere that you can't get on a phone. You can't be on social media without being concerned. Even this discussion we're having now, even something that impacts on how we can have this discussion is the fact that there are agents who are listening to me and listening to us, and who will take stuff and create and fabricate. Even have this thing called deep fake, fabricate charges, criminal charges. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that we were looking at in 1960s, and people were disgusted with it. So the Panther 21, after something like 2 years in jail, fighting these cases, etc., they were found not guilty. But the damage that was done to the Black Panther Party was extremely significant, especially in New York. But even this was preceded, as you know, we talk about what this case is about. More than 100 years ago, the FBI cut his teeth on an attack on Marcus Garvey. And this is really important, Kim. I want to just say this because most people are only familiar with Black movements through things like what they call Black Lives Matter, things like the NAACP, and don't know that historically there have always been two tendencies, two trends of Black struggle in this country. One, that said that we have to have our own power, take care of ourselves, be self-reliant, be self-determining, and another that says the only way to freedom is to integrate into the system of oppression itself. And Marcus Garvey had built a magnificent organization, more than 11 million people from Africans from around the world. It was attacked by the FBI. And finally, I mean, this is an organization that had bought steamship lines, et cetera, for Black people, created factories, uniting, creating economic development for Black people, and the FBI attacked that. That was Hoover. Hoover, cut his teeth as a part of that process. Of course, Hoover, I mean J. Edgar Hoover, who was the executive director of the NAACP for 100 years. And so, this kind of aggression. And then 1951, W.E.B. Du Bois, a co-founder of the NAACP and who worked with the FBI against Marcus Garvey himself, was charged with being an agent of Russia, etc. 1951, 52, Paul Robeson came under assault. So all of these stuff, were under similar charges, etc. So that's been the history. And there's been this tendency, this trend, I'm saying, that's quite different from what most people are familiar with. That means it's going to be, it sounds weird to hear Black people talking about self-government, self-determination, self-reliance, welfare, slavery, etc., who want to be able to take care of our own affairs, who are not just trying to find a way to get in bed with liberals in this country. That sounds weird. And it's because this is something that's been kept from recognition by most people. You can learn about slavery, you can learn about the NAACP, you can learn about Martin Luther King, but you can't learn about Marcus Garvey, and you can't learn about Malcolm X in any meaningful kind of way. And you can't learn about even Elijah Muhammad and people who actually were trying to do something different in terms of seizing control of our own lives. So that's one of the things that they depend on. And one of the reasons I'm glad that you raised some of the questions you did, because I think it's important for your listeners and viewers to understand that there's always been this. I'm not a peculiar guy. This has been since we were first brought to these shores at gunpoint. And there were people who were saying that I'm not trying to stay here in this situation. I want control of our own lives as a people, that you can't have dignity as a people unless you're able to feed, clothe, and house yourself.
So explain that a little bit more to us, the differences between, it sounds almost like you're wanting to create, or the movement is to create a separate government. So rather than integrating in, because you're saying there's a difference between those who just want to integrate into the current system and then those who want to break away from the system. Is that right? Can you explain that a little better?
Well, when we get down to it, Africans in this country, along with the indigenous people already here, are the only ones who did not come to America looking for a better way of life. We lost a better way of life. We came at gunpoint. So, like, people like to talk about how America is this nation of immigrants, but Black people didn't come as immigrants, we came as captives. That's just an objective truth. And so the question is, how do you deal with this? There's been a sector of the population say, well, we just got to take it like we find it and just try to find a way to get the oppressors and things like that to like us and treat us better and somehow find a way to integrate into it. There are others who are saying that I hate oppression and that to be in captivity like this is to be oppressed, because it didn't just happen to us here, it happened all over the Black world. We're all scattered in what happened without any control of our lives or our resources. So this was the distinction. and peoples everywhere. In 1966, I think it was, a magnificent uh, conference was held in Havana, Cuba. A trilateral conference, no, tricontinental conference was happening that where peoples from Africa, Asia, and Latin America came together, and the critical question that was being addressed was colonialism, that we are all dominated by colonialism, and that people have to have their own freedom. Look, yeah, and so I just think that's important. So yeah, we want to be a self-governing people just like everybody else. Yeah.
But where would you do this? I mean, isn't that kind of the concept behind Liberia?
No, Liberia is an American colony. It started as an American
Well, but
colony.
I mean, the idea was, okay, here's some, maybe here's some land, and I mean, obviously failed, and I don't even know
It
what the
didn't just
entire
fail.
purpose was, and
It
maybe
was
there was
not what I'm talking. I'm saying that first of all, Africa is the national homeland of Black people globally. We don't have to
right.
find this some place. We don't have to find something that has been created by the people who put us in chains in the first place. Africa, it belongs to African people. And the borders that you see in Africa today that people often refer to as different countries, they were created in 1884 and 85 at a conference in Berlin, Germany. No Black people were even involved in that. They carved up Africa and then gave it to different sections of European colonizers, different countries and what have you. And that's what we're suffering now all over the Black world and in Africa because of that. And so, for a long period of time, it was very clear to us. Like I said, Marcus Garvey built a movement that in 1919 declared Africa for Africans at home and abroad, so that we can have our own resources, our own future in our own hands. That's just a natural inclination of people.
Right. So
So
I'm asking you, where would you, if you want
Africa is the
self-determination,
homeland. Africa is the homeland. One, two, but
but
that's
are
not
you
the.
pushing, but are you pushing for like immigration over it, sort of like all the Jews in the world. There's a big push by Israel to bring them home to Israel, right? To have their own Jewish nation. Are you saying something along those lines in Africa
No,
or
what I'm
here?
saying, no, I'm not. What I'm saying is that first of all, many Africans leave here on a regular basis going to Africa. By the way, and Ghana is one of the places offer even like dual citizenship for African people who want to,
Hmm.
come back to Africa. It's one of the doors of no return. Africans leaving Africa, and getting on ships and disappearing from history. But we are talking about Africa, that the revolutionary project that we are talking about encompasses the whole African continent, that Africans have to be self governing, the borders have to be destroyed in Africa, and the borders that separate Black people globally have to be destroyed, that Africa has created a lot of wealth in various places around the world and by Black people around the world. So we are simply stating that we have the right to self-government, and this is a project in that direction. So we're not looking at this whole notion of 54 different Africas, which is ridiculous. Which means that Africa would never have power. Which means
Hmm.
that, like right now, for example, France, uh, very shakily at this moment, controls something like 14 different African countries, and it controls the economy to the point that something like I think it's something like 64% of the gross domestic product that comes from these countries go straight to a French treasury, and then France also charges something like 15% for handling it. The Africans don't even know how much money we have in French treasury, et cetera. And then we have to pay interest if we try to get our own money from French-controlled banks. So that's a part of the contradiction. France is rich to some extent off of what it gets from Africa. Africans from Haiti, slavery built the Eiffel Towers. For France, you understand. So these resources need to be accessible to Black people ourselves, to Africans. And so, if Pan Africanism, if you will, is good for France, and it seems to be, it was until Africa is now in a very serious push to get France out of there. Then clearly it has to be good for Black people, for Africans ourselves. But that's not the only picture. This is not a suggestion that everybody should go back to Africa. The fact is, Africans are already there. and we are part of a common project of to emancipate Africa, including the Africans who are there. We are part of that. We have organization right now. We have organization in Caribbean. We have organization in South Africa, in West Africa, in East Africa. We have organization of Black people who in Europe, etc. So it's one Black nation that we are really trying to reconsolidate. And again, the presence of African people in Africa is the thing that makes the difference in what we are talking about. So the liberation of African people is something that will be facilitated by our struggle on the global level. It's a strategic approach that we have to that. And that means that the resources in Africa, instead of going now to France, instead of going now, every cell phone you got, the computers that we use right now, it uses coltan, 87% of which comes from Congo. Or it uses cobalt, which is really necessary for engines and things like that. These are resources in Africa, but Africa is starving. Africa is starving. It has not access to its own. In Sierra Leone, some of the best diamonds in the world are there in Sierra Leone. But people who take the diamonds up are trying to live off 32 cents a day and a cup of rice. And many of them have never seen a finished diamond in their lives, and they're starving. There is no electrical grid there, national electrical grid. The water is unclean and what have you. But all those diamonds, there's someplace. You can find them in the mall here. You can find them in various other places, but except in Africa. So the point I'm saying, and then one of the other things, of course, the most incredibly significant thing is the human resources that have come from Africa that Africa does not have access to. And part of this was intentional to the extent that the so-called trade in Black people was not just for physical labor, but for technology. And it included technology. I mean, rice growing and other kind of, where there was an actual targeting areas in Africa where we were extraordinarily proficient in growing rice and what have you. And, that's why there was a so-called Uncle Ben. So the point I'm making, the basic point I'm making, Kim, is this, that our movement is one that is about Black people having control of our lives. That we don't want welfare slavery. We have created economic institutions in this country that are being attacked right now by the United States government. We have created doulas in a city like St. Louis, where enough Black babies die in the first year of life to fill 15 kindergarten classrooms. We have created farmers markets there and what they call food deserts, so that Black people not only can have access to food and things like that, but so there can be some economics inside the community. So money just doesn't come in one door and then go straight out the other, so that there can be a circulation of money, so that Black people can begin to hire each other with the assets that's come. We have a market, One Africa, One Nation market in Philadelphia that's been there for maybe 20 years or so, where more than 100 vendors help to feed their families as a consequence of that. And Black people from all over the region come because you can find things at this market. I'm wearing part of it right now that you can't find, in your local department stores. It feeds out culture and it scratches all the intellectual itches that we may have as Black people, etc. This is what we do, and this is what's under attack. And I mentioned the doula that we have right now. We in North St. Louis, we have raised more than $160,000 and built a basketball court in the middle of the Black community because children end up having to play with makeshift basketball courts in the streets. It's a world-class basketball court that we built. And you know how we built it? Because some white people united with this, what it is that we do, and participate in giving what they characterize as reparations. It didn't come from the city government. It didn't come from Joe Biden or anything. Joe Biden hasn't built a damn thing in our community, nor the Democratic Party, but we do. And I think this is one of the reasons that makes us a target also, because every success, everything we do to create these kinds of economic development is a statement about what the government is not doing.
So let me ask you about reparations on that front, because it sounds to me like your big goal is economic independence for Black people in Africa, here in the United States, all around the
Yes.
world, economic independence, being able to
Yes.
build things, hire each other, build that wealth. And I
Yes.
completely understand that. And you've even brought up Vietnam, and I myself am Vietnamese, and I've seen the Vietnamese community. Even in California, when I was very young, it was a very rough part of town. It was a very rough part of town because there wasn't any money. Everybody was a refugee.
Right.
But through time, they built up the economic resources. And one of the aspects I think that helped build that to now that area is very wealthy, and it's very safe, and yet it's still Vietnamese. It didn't get gentrified. What happened was the Vietnamese people built up economy, many, even my own family, willing to commute an hour each way to go to the economic, hub of wherever they're making their money and bring it back into their
Yes.
community to build that community. And that is something the Vietnamese people did. So I completely understand. And that's something I've always said, this is the way to do it. You've got to, I've watched it. I grew up with it. I saw it with my own
Hmm.
eyes. It happened. So I know it can be done. So this is what you seem to be advocating for. So what about the idea of reparations then? What would be your ideal? In California, there's a coalition of people, a board that have just recommended payments from up to $1.5 million, I think, for individuals, Black individuals in California. Of course, this is going to be contested by people, but curious what would you like to see on that front?
First of all, let me tell you this, Kim. I appreciate this, that the African People's Socialist Party built the first mass movement dedicated to reparations in the history of this country. In 1982, we held a World Tribunal on Reparations to African people in the United States, and we held that in Brooklyn, New York. We had a panel of jurists that presided over this process. We had experts, including historians and people who, economists and people who work in the communities, Black people, cultural workers, etc. In fact, Tupac Shakur's mother was one of the persons who testified at this tribunal. And for the first time in history, there was an actual quantification of the amount of value that was taken from Black people through the slave process in this country, through just labor alone, not just through slavery. And so we had made it a point that we were going to make the reparations issue a household word in this country. And the objective was to win everybody to the notion of reparations. And we didn't come up with a specific way how it would be done for all the other people who participated. So there have been suits filed. There have been people doing all this other stuff. There's a HR 40 that people have been waiting for more than 40 years for the government to do something. But we've always recognized that the question of reparations is not something that's going to be resolved by the government or nor the corporations, though we support whatever kinds of movements and things are happening with governments and corporations. We believe that the reparations question is something that's going to be resolved by people, by African working class, the working people, and also by white people, not the government. And through this relationship, I mentioned $150,000, $60,000 for a basketball court, but we've done incredible work. You should come. I challenge you to come to North St. Louis and see how we've transformed an entire community. We are destroying dilapidated places and building new things in their places, meeting halls. We are in the process right now of we're doing the work. We purchased a massive building where we're going to have Uhuru Bakery Cafe, and we're going to be hiring African people, men and women who are coming out of the prison system. We purchased a fourplex where there's going to be a place where we can house them, and we'll be teaching them how the culinary arts and things like that, and how to run their own businesses, etc. So this is what we are doing, like on that front, and it's really important. So how do we do this? We're raising thousands and thousands of dollars. There's a women's health clinic that we're in the process. I think we raised more than $80,000 already, and much of this is coming from white people who unite with what it is that we're trying to do, who unite with the idea of self-determination, who unite that African people should be paid reparations, and themselves feel like they want to make contributions toward that end. So we're not opposed to the government doing this and that, but we're not relying on the government. And I think this is one of the problems that we have, because we're not relying on the government. We believe that the corporations should pay their corporations who built themselves off slave labor and whatever, off selling Black people. Yes, they should make contributions, and we support every effort to do that, but we're not relying on that. We talk about the people being organized and coming into a relationship, and that helps to rectify this horrible historical relationship that exists between black people and white people in this country. We rectified that relationship. We're not asking people not to be white. We're asking them not to be active colonizers. We're asking them to help repair the damage that has been done to black people, etc. So that's the reparations thing is really real to us, and we think it's really important because there's not going to be any catch up. I read a study some a few years ago that said that it would take 100 was it 100 or 240 years or so for the level of economic achievement for black people would equal what white people already have, and I don't have that kind of time.
Yeah, I
Nobody
believe I
does.
believe that's
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
yeah, I believe that's
yeah,
probably accurate when you think about it.
yeah.
Um, well, so you're not saying anything to me that sounds very controversial. So my question now is, what is the government's beef with you? Why do they not like you? Why is the Democratic Party not like you? Who do you think is most after you, and why would they?
I think liberals are terrified because there's a whole industry that has been created around black people and poverty programs and jobs aplenty at different times associated with welfare, et cetera, and prestige. And also, so I think people, this means loss of jobs and a whole bunch of other stuff, and it gives a real kind of satisfaction, narcissistic kind of satisfaction to be able to help black people by voting for Barack Obama, or to help to be, like some kind of Tarzan role as it relates to black people. And that's not acceptable. And it's demeaning. They contribute and work very hard at keeping African people where we're located. One. Two, the other thing is that uh, right now in particular, but it happens otherwise. This issue of the 2024 election at this point right now, but it's where we've seen this fracturing over the centuries. In fact, about black people participating in the electoral process. At one time, most of the Africans, after the formal ending of slavery, were Republicans. And then, of course, the Republicans got together with the Democratic Party in 1776 and had the so-called compromise where the Republicans agreed that they would take federal troops out of the South that was protecting the black people here if the Democrats would allow the person who had stolen the election at that time to actually go into office. And they did that. That's when you see the emerged Ku Klux Klan and things like that attacking us. And then so we were Republicans, and then we moved toward the Democrats under Roosevelt. We became quote unquote Democrats, and we've seen the Democrats double cross us, as well. And now we saw Biden running as the white guy most competent, most capable of taking the white vote away from white Trump. And so now there's this dilemma, so that Biden now is adopting all of these policies and what have you that work against our own interests. And if we don't have a capacity to find our own interests and work for it, then we're like ping pong balls, and we are subject to the strategic interests of any different sector of the population. And all of this happens above the heads of all the people who don't generally understand what the hell is going on and why they can read so much stuff about black crime, and why they can read, just the nonsense that's pumped into their brains, et cetera, that confuses more than it explains anything. So I think that's part of what it is that we're looking at. And I think that Africans represent a real serious source, not only of cheap labor, but also a threat to a reserve labor forces that also suppresses wages, generally speaking, because there's an African who always needs a job. We need jobs, jobs, jobs. And so even if you have organized labor and you have people who are trying to fight, for better wages, et cetera, the threat of black people, which is something that uses black people against ordinary white workers, is there that continues to make wages, suppress wages, and other things like that, and offer
So
the
you think
scapegoat.
that Well, so
Go
you
ahead.
think that the Democratic Party is fundamentally against you because anyone who, well, so they clearly have an agenda to keep Black people down because then they could
Yes,
constantly have the narrative of, well, we can save you and we're the only ones who can.
yes,
So don't vote for the racists, vote for us,
yes,
right? And then you're right, nothing ever seems to happen, nothing ever
yeah.
changes. You get double crossed, as you say. And it's interesting you bring that up because it does seem like anytime there's a Black Republican politician or somebody who supports a Republican who's Black, they tend to get demonized as somehow being almost like they're unable to think for themselves, but that they've been brainwashed or co opted or they're under the control of some nefarious other entity. And that seems to also be what's happened to you. There's this idea that, you can't think for yourself. You're not capable, but that someone else is controlling you. And that must be why you're not a hardcore Democrat. Do you feel like that's,
Well,
because
an
that's
aspect of
my
it,
perception?
certainly, there's a presumption that African people do not have agency. We don't have agency. Somebody is always making our agenda for us. We're always working for some other interest. We don't have the ability to define our own reality and our own objectives and things like that. And I'm not claiming, like the Republican Party is any better. I'm saying the problem that we have is that any party, any organization that is capable of defining your interests independent of your involvement or control of that process is going to be a problem. Every force will work to solve its own problem, will speak to its own agenda, and Black people need to have that capacity. So people who call themselves Republicans and what have you, somebody else establishing that agenda. Same thing is happening to the Democratic Party, but we get attacked because we work for our own independent agenda that Black people have to have, and that's the thing that's threatening because of Black people who are not controlled, and we are not controlled. And the way the Democratic Party is moving right now is because of how things happening. Remember, the Republican Party used to be characterized the party of the rich, and the Democratic the party of the working people, et cetera, et cetera. But what's happening now, that's not what is happening. I'm not talking about who's got the money. I'm talking about who's being appealed to in this country, and it's white working people who have gravitated toward the Republican Party and white people. And so now, what the Democratic Party, Biden, they are doing is they're creating these little pockets of neo-colonial control. They have a situation where Biden brags about having the most diverse cabinet in history, and so he's got Black generals who now have the responsibility of containing Africa with AFRICOM. He's got Black general who is over the Department of Defense, so that the war that's being made against peoples around the world will have a Black face and not the typical face, but also because it attracts Black people. See what we're doing for Black people. They got a Black vice president, Kamala Harris. They got an indigenous woman who's over the Department of Interior. So the objective now is to lock all of these people into the Democratic Party through these faces, who are supposed to be representing all these damn people, and they represent the same people all along. The indigenous people don't have any damn power. If they did, they'd be able to get Leonard Peltier out of prison. The woman over there, she could call for that, but she doesn't. And Black people don't have any political power. We wouldn't be bombed at 5 o'clock in the morning by agents who claim that we are not working for Black people, for somebody else. And the fact of the matter is, it's Kamala Harris who's working for somebody else, and not for Black people. And so this is the reality that Black people have to have access to our own power. If we don't, then we become objects that is utilized to facilitate the interests of whoever does have the party power. And it doesn't matter what you call that party. If you don't have power, and if there is power out there being exercised, it will exercise power in your name sometime, or it would exercise power in order to eliminate you as a factor that can have some control over your own lives. Uhuru. Yeah.
And so, how often have they been able to get you for thought crimes? I mean, they've been trying to pin you down for the last however long for various different
Yeah.
thought crimes, freedom of speech. Can you just tell us a bit? We're getting close to the end here, and I just really want to focus on how you're obviously a man of great conviction. You believe the things that you're saying. You've built an entire movement based on this for many decades, um, and yet you are attacked constantly, and even are under attack now for your own free thinking and your own free speech. So, can you tell us just a little bit more about that, the attack on you?
Yeah, I think that's important because to make the point that nobody's charged us with with stealing anything or you know kidnapping anybody or otherwise harming folk, even any act of violence or what have you. And in saying that, I'm just contextualizing it, but it's what we think and what we advocate. And right now we're at a particular place. But I was arrested in St. Petersburg, Florida, in the 1960s because they said they created a law called verbal abuse of the police, because we said something like the police and the Klan work hand in hand. They made a law, verbal abuse of police. I was arrested for that, for violating that law. I was arrested at different times for various other kinds of. I mentioned to you what happened in Gainesville, Florida, around the free speech issue, and there were several other kinds of free speech issues that I was attacked for. I was handcuffed in the back seat of a police car, and with my hands cuffed behind my back, and police clubbed me. I mean, just beat me to my head was swollen this big, and they were able to use as a basis for doing that the fact that when they had arrested me and were on the way to the police station, they said this in court, that I was sticking my head out the window yelling at somebody, so they had to beat me in order to keep me from hurting myself. And this nonsense, happened in a courtroom. I was arrested, as I said, for making a statement in Gainesville that the bullet that killed Martin Luther King had killed nonviolence in this country, and so I was arrested for having said that. I was arrested. Yeah, everything has been around this question of free speech, of what I've said. That there's no instance that I've been arrested for any other thing, and there were a lot of those kinds of arrests around things that I've said and things that they thought I meant, whether I said it or not. And that was certainly true of the Florida riot, how it was inciting to riot act. Yeah.
What can people do now to help you as you go through the many, one more in a line of many troubles, it seems, in your quest to just gain some independence and freedom for Black people around the world and here in America? What can people do to help you?
Well, the first thing I really want to say, Kim, is that now we talked about some extent to what I say may appear controversial or something like that. That this issue of free speech is very, very important. The issue of the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search, is very, very important. And at the point where people can hear unpopular ideas or ideas that's not mainstream, and allow the state to get away without protest of attacking those rights. Those are not the African People's Socialist Party First Amendment that they're attacking. Those are not Omali Yeshitela's right to free speech that's being attacked. At the moment they can do that, they attack everybody's right to free speech. There's no way in hell that we can allow this continuous ongoing erosion of basic democratic rights, that even if they use me or anybody else who may at this time be unpopular, and then justify doing, because it sets everybody up. Everybody is set up. So I'm calling on people to come to Hands Off Uhuru. That's UHURU, handsoffuhuru.org. And then on Saturday, there is going to be a mass meeting virtually. and that and go to handsoffuhuru.org and access that. We would like for you to come on so you can see all the other things that you can do. And I'm also calling Kim on your audience to take the mystery out of all of this stuff that we are talking about, the isms and et cetera. Come and see it yourself. Come to North St. Louis. See what we've done. This is concrete. This is not something that that has been invented or you even have to believe. You can come and see for yourself. Come to St. Petersburg, Florida. See what we've done. See that we've done things that governments have not done, but governments have attacked us for having done it. 1996, in this city of St. Petersburg, Florida, where I'm currently located, the police murdered 18-year-old Tyron Lewis. And I spoke out, and we spoke out around the grand jury of refusing to indict the cops who murdered the kid. And the police attacked us. This Uhuru house in St. Petersburg, Florida, that they attacked on July 29th. They attacked it with more than 300 military forces, local police, county police, the state patrol, and they had the National Guards at the armory here for that, for speaking. And after the attack, they used all the tear gas in the city of St. Petersburg against this place, and they didn't arrest anybody. And so this is the free speech issue is a critical issue. And we didn't see a single civil libertarian who jumped up and say, how are you attacking these people? How are you doing this? They set buildings afire, et cetera, in the process of doing that. And that shouldn't be possible. And you don't have to like me or like anything I've said, but if you like the issue of free speech, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, then you have to fight this fight because they're coming for you. And this, from their perspective, I'm low-hanging fruit. From their perspective. Anyway, so handsoffuhuru.org. And also anticipate Saturday, there's going to be a virtual rally where we'll get into much more of the things that people can do. Handsoffuhuru.org. You can get all the information around that.
Yeah, I absolutely wish you the best of luck in this and absolutely hope for justice to prevail because you are very correct that if they can come after you, they can come after anyone. And you may seem like low-hanging fruit to them, and that might be why they're going after you, but the precedent will be set if this case of yours doesn't prevail on your behalf. The precedent will be used in this case to go after more and more and bigger until they catch whoever it is they're really after. They might have their sights set on some big fish, but they've got to set the groundwork first, and you've got to have the laws on your side. And the way you get the laws on your side is you get these court case precedents set so that you can then point to that case and say, well, in this case, this is what happened. And so therefore, in this case, you need to also rule in the same way. And that is where the danger really lies, is that this is a road that they're paving. And it is being paved in a very, very scary, dangerous direction. And you're right. Anybody who loves free speech, anybody who loves the right to not be searched and seized without a real reason should 100% be in opposition and should be joining you in bringing to light this very important case. So best of luck to you, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Really, thank you so much for this conversation, and hope to see you again, and hopefully in even better circumstances when all of this is over, and hopefully when things prevail, when justice is served in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you, Kim. And I really believe that in the final analysis, the people who make history, and that this is a political attack. They're using law to carry out political warfare. And for political warfare to be effective, the people are critical and key to it. And if the people make it very clear that they are opposed to how this is happening, they are opposed to the Democratic Party and Biden's attack on us, that they should drop these charges. They are ridiculous. They should drop the charges. And I think if we hear a loud enough cry coming from people here, that this can happen and the precedent that they want to establish will not be possible. So thank you so much, Kim. And I want to thank all of you, your audience, your listeners, your viewers as well. And I hope I did not complicate this discussion complicate this question with the kinds of issues that we've dealt with. And the only reason that is possible is because these ideas have been kept from public view for a long period of time. They've killed people who have even espoused some of the things that we're talking about, arrested them, et cetera, and created, dragnets to make sure it doesn't happen. So we should continue to talk, and we should learn a lot more. And I appreciate hearing about your family, because there's not only a Vietnamese community, there's a Chinese community, Chinatown, and what have you. Why can't African people be able to have economic interest of our own that feeds and clothes and houses our people? It should make sense to do that. So thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.